Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. So today we're tackling the Canon R7 and noisy images. We'll look at DxO PureRAW 2, we'll look at Topaz Denoise AI, we'll look at Lightroom, straight into Lightroom and straight into CaptureOne, see how one image varies across all four different approaches, and I'll tell you which one I use and which one I think looks the best to me. So let's jump into it. Okay, and then before we jump into this, one thing I just wanted to point out is I receive no compensation from any of this. This is not about money for me. I am not getting these products for free. I have no allegiance to any of these products. I don't get paid by Lightroom. I don't get products free from Lightroom, from Adobe, from CaptureOne, from DxO, from Topaz, none of it. So don't get first access, don't get first looks, none of that. So it's totally just an unbiased review. But I will note that CaptureOne and DxO and Topaz all have trials. So they are full functioning trials. I think they're about a month each. So I would recommend before you buy any of these products, try them, try out these settings that we'll walk through today, and check it out for yourself because, why not? I mean, they're free. It's pretty amazing that you can try these out for a month and just get into the processing. And that would be my recommendation for you, is try it out for yourself. But hopefully today we'll go through some of the settings that you can go through, and it will be useful for you as a starting point as you consider the different options. Okay, so the image that I wanted to share with you is just kind of a basic early morning image that you get in the winter in New England. It's an American robin. These are pretty ubiquitous in our area, and they're always out kind of as the sun comes up. So I was out at a local spot. I had the Canon R7 with the EF 300 f2.8 Mark II lens, which is one I talked about in the last video. And this combination allows you to get pretty good performance early in the morning, but it was still quite dark, and I was shooting at around ISO 8000 to 12800 and had ISO 10,000 on this particular image. So let me open up the image here for you and we will look at this together. So I'm going to open it up here in preview just as a first way to look at this image and share with you the EXIF data here. The exposure was at 420 focal length, which means I was using the 1.4x teleconverter at f4. And the exposure time was 1/800th of a second, so not particularly fast, so very low light situation, and ISO speed was 10,000. So this is the image. If we look at it in preview here, you can see a fair amount of noise. It's not actually that bad. Preview does its own kind of denoising process here, and this is the image that I want to walk through. Let's open this up. We're going to do this first in DxO PureRAW 2, and I'll just show you what we're dealing with here. So DxO has modules. They're optics modules. It's basically a calibration to whatever equipment you're using. So in this case, I'm using the Canon R7, the EF 300 as I mentioned, and the teleconverter. It's going to download that if you don't already have it. And then when you process images, there are really only a few options here. There's the method and then options that you do under that method. I won't go into too much detail on this, but essentially I just think Deep Prime, which is their most AI-driven approach, is the best. I haven't experimented that much with HQ and Prime because Deep Prime has such good results. If you want, you can read about it in more detail here. But it's basically about processing power, and I have a pretty updated computer, an M1 Pro MacBook. So it's able to handle this in like about 15 seconds per image. Oh, it says 14 seconds here. So the other thing you have options on here is the optical corrections. So the choices here are lens sharpening. Now this is sharpening. I mean, this is using the AI to do the sharpening. This is kind of similar to what Topaz Denoise does. Separately, we can do lens distortion correction, and this is going to be what the lens profiles would be in Lightroom. I think DxO does a really good job of this. They actually preserve a little bit more of the image, particularly on like wide angle shots where you have a lot of barrel distortion. So, it is actually really nice to use the lens correction. So I basically have two settings in my mind here. The first one is deep prime I'm always using, and the two settings are either lens sharpening is on or lens sharpening is off. That's basically the only two things that I do. So we're going to just process without lens sharpening. I'm then going to do it with lens sharpening, and then we'll move into Topaz Denoise. You can see the prediction is pretty accurate. It's about 14-15 seconds. Outputs the image in a file, and that's what we've got. So I'm going to do that again. I'm not going to make you watch, but I'm going to do it again without the sharpening assigned, so I can have with and without. And then, when you're done pressing the image, it does give you this nice slider format here where you can see what it looks like before and after. All right, so let's now do the same thing, and we're going to process this in Topaz and walk through what that is like. So the image is now in Topaz. Now the first thing I notice here is the difference in the way that the two programs approach color. The Topaz image is just very different. It's more brown, kind of orangey tones, compared to the more cool tones of DxO. And in fact, as these updates have rolled out with these two programs, I'm seeing more and more kind of divergence in the way that they process color initially. Obviously, you can correct for this in Lightroom or CaptureOne, whatever you're doing with white balance, and also adjusting the color sliders, hue and saturation. But it is pretty different. So, within Topaz, Topaz needs many more options, so there's more we could talk about here. This isn't a review really of Topaz, so I'm not going to go into too much detail here. But when you process images that are raw images in Topaz, you can use these AI models here at the top, or you actually unlock, because of the raw file, the ability to just process the raw and denoise, which is much akin to what we're doing in DxO PureRAW 2. So I'm going to select this raw option here because that's what we're doing. First time I'm going to do it is I'm just going to use the auto preferences here. So this is allowing Topaz Denoise to automatically select it. I'll process with automatic selection here, which is really heavy denoising and sharpening. And then I'm going to reprocess this with a less intense version. Now I read, as I was kind of looking into this, and I've talked to others, some people really just march these sliders all the way down to the very beginning. So they'll basically apply, 1 or 2, 5, whatever, to sharpening and noise, and just very subtly kind of nudge the AI instead of aggressively processing it. I'm actually going to do a scenario where I do 5 and 5. So we're going to stay in raw processing here. We're going to do 5 on removing noise and 5 on sharpening. And you can see, that is having a pretty big impact. If we look at, you can zoom in here a little bit and look at the original versus the processed image. That's the original, where you can see banding here, in some of the noise, which is not very appealing in the shadows. And you can see it's removing most of that banding, and we're also getting a nice kind of image out of processing. So I'm going to do it with auto, 5 and 5, and then I'll also do the clear setting. And I'm going to select clear with medium and low. So medium noise and low enhancing sharpness. So we'll do processing in those 3 different modes in Topaz. I'll run it through, and then we'll open up these results in Lightroom and CaptureOne and see what they look like. So we've got the images here in Lightroom. Now, the first thing you can see is the variation in the colors, which I just find really interesting, how the different processing is rendering color on initiation. So the most dramatic difference here is the Topaz Clear model. And this may be because this is more not designed for a raw file. I'm not really sure, but the DxO ones are fairly consistent with the original, so this is how Lightroom's rendering the original, and then you have the two DxOs, one with sharpening and one without sharpening. That's these 3, the original and then the other 2. And then you have clear here, and 5 and 5, the kind of low-level sharpening and denoising, and then you have the auto setting here. So the first thing I'm going to do is just select an area of the image to do color balance for all of them. So I'm going to use the white of the eye here on all of them. Let me quickly do that. We're going to need to do a little bit more on that clear version in order to match the color. Okay, next thing I'm going to do is look at the histograms for brightness. So let's just compare like the two here. So if you yeah, we're seeing a difference. So if you look here at the histogram in the top right corner, just so we can compare, you can see with the DxO is rendering a little bit brighter in this case. So what I'm going to do is just bring the exposure up to match the, I think it's about half a stop it looks like. So there you can see we're roughly matching the two exposures. Maybe that's a little bit over, so let's do like 0.45. Okay, and I'm going to do that for both of these. So now you can see, you know, those histograms look fairly similar. Might have not to obsess over it here, but I think I overdid a little bit, so let's drop it down to 0.4 plus exposure. All right, so now we have files that are fairly similar. Now this one here, I think we're going to need to do a little bit more on. I mean, the first thing that's apparent to me is it's just it's a very different exposure. I mean, look at how it's kind of leaning right. So I think we need to drop the exposure here. And more so. It's also got way more red. So what I'm going to do is drop the red and greens. I think the greens are really oversaturated on this image. I also think we're going to need to adjust the hue a little bit. It's a little bit too red. It's like not orange enough. If you look at the other Topaz, it's much more kind of, yeah, it's more subtle. So I think we need to also drop the oranges. So what I'm doing is I'm just trying to match them so that we can compare. But I mean, what you're getting here is the difference in the way that the two files are processed. Alright, so now I just want to like quickly compare all of them kind of next to each other. So, you know, this is the original. This is what it looks like when you open it on Lightroom. Look at that green. I mean, it's a lot. It's partly the way Lightroom processes Canon files and the way that Canon has not cooperated with Lightroom and this whole story there. But however you look at it, I mean, that is a pretty noisy image. And if you're, you know, Jared Polin and like you subscribe to his, you know, anti-noise or his pro-noise agenda, then I think this is fine. I mean, I don't think that image looks bad for 10,000. It's actually a pretty nice image, and you do sacrifice some of the sharpness when you denoise. But look, I mean, when we go across here, the difference between the original here and the DxO with sharpening is huge in terms of noise. Now, I think this image here looks a lot more natural than this image. Not because of the noise, but because of the weird kind of overemphasis of certain details and underemphasis of others. So it just feels like, you know, everything is sharpened, right? The eye looks okay, but then this area here looks like weird to me compared to this. This looks more natural. It's kind of a nice sort of like normal curve of sharpness with depth of field, and this looks just like overly crusty. So to me, I do not really like to use the sharpening option within DxO. I find it to be overwhelming. And this is the option without sharpening. Now, it's not a huge difference. You know, there still is some sharpening that's going on here for sure. But when you compare, you know, these two images and you look at like, we look at like the DxO without sharpening here and the original here, you know, you can see side by side just the difference here in terms of the noise. And I think this image looks quite good. It doesn't look overly crusty to me, and it does get rid of all that noise in a really nice way. We can see it also in the feet, you know, here. So that's kind of a nice comparison there. If we pull up the denoise, this is interesting. So this is the Topaz medium low option. This is the clear that we've adjusted here. And you can see in terms of the sharpening, it's a lot less. The truth is, though, there are elements of this image that I really like. I like the way it's rendering the the eye here. I mean, the colors are not matching yet, but it's nice. The feathers kind of look actually quite nice here. And if we compare that to like the Topaz without sharpening, which is this one, I mean, I don't know. I think these the Denoise one here. I think these Topaz feathers look really nice. They are like very sharpened though. I mean, you can see like there's a lot of extra sharpening here that's going on compared to here. This part looks quite good. This part looks weird to me. Now we're really obviously getting into pixel peeping here, but it is interesting, I think, to look at these, see how they different render. I think that the DxO is more consistent. I mean, it doesn't look quite as good here as the Topaz does, with this is the clear setting, but it does look more authentic here and less kind of like overly sharpened. All right, it's really pixel peeping. Let's look at the 5 and 5 because I think this is probably the most useful setting. In this setting, we are really moderately denoising, but you're still seeing a pretty good effort. So if we compare that to the original, you know, this is the original here on the left. This is the edited, the 5 and 5 scenario. And the denoising is really effective in the background. It's not, there's no artifacting in the same way that we saw with the clear setting. So, you know, you can see here in the original, this area here that we were talking about before, I mean, this looks fine to me. It doesn't look fake. The colors are a little, it's just interesting. I mean, they're just like not as saturated in the Topaz product, but I think they've actually come a long way. They've done some updates recently, and I'm not seeing a lot of artifacting at all in the Topaz version. It is not sharpened though, you know, you definitely can see that. Like in the original, it's almost like it's de-sharpened, right? Like this looks sharper than this to me. And that may be because the noise, the denoising is pulling away a lot of that sharpness, and we're not replacing it, we're not putting it back with the AI. So we're getting a situation where it's a little bit more muddled. You know, if I were to choose between these two, I definitely would see the argument for choosing the original because it's just got a lot more acuity, you know, in the eye and whatnot. So finally, let's look at the auto setting here, which is what we're looking at here, compared to the original. So, you know, this is the original on the left, and then this is the auto setting. So, is that true? That is false. This would be the auto setting here. Okay, so this is where I start to have problems with Topaz. It's just, it does not do a good job with edges. I mean, this here, right here, looks fake to me. It is kind of weirdly crusty again, kind of in this zone. You get weird artifacting, so I don't know if you can see this on YouTube, but this whole area here around the crest of the head has weird kind of residual artifacts that just look fake. It looks AI-y to me. And then you also have a little bit of kind of crustiness here. So it's not a bad product. I mean, I don't think you'd necessarily know it if you weren't working with the files. But man, to me, it's, yeah, it just kind of like, it just looks kind of crusty. And I think I'd take the original file. Now, let's compare what the two settings I would consider. So on the left here, we can see on the left here we see DxO PureRAW with no sharpening, and then or moderate sharpening. We've not selected the global sharpening option, and on the right we see the Topaz 5 and 5, which is what I would probably use on Topaz. So let's look here. Sorry, I'm having a little trouble zooming. Okay, so if we look at comparison here of the two files, you know, you be the judge. You tell me what you prefer. I think there are going to be people who are going to prefer the Topaz product, and there are going to be people who prefer DxO. I think I just prefer DxO, personally. I like the colors. I like the saturation. I don't find this to be overly sharpened, but it's probably like a little bit overly sharpened. It's like right over the edge. And then the Topaz product I like, but it's not, it's just, it needs sharpening now. So it's just kind of this like hard trade-off. I guess we could probably apply more sharpening to Topaz and kind of ratchet that up maybe towards like 7 or 8 or 10 on the sharpening so that we can try to recover some of those details. And maybe I'll quickly go ahead and do that just so we can compare apples to apples. So, okay, so now what I've done is I've just brought it in, I've done the white balance again on the eye, and what we have here is a Topaz product here that has 15 on sharpening. I need to go a little bit higher and 5 on denoise. So let's just quickly, compare the two here. So you can see we have brought back some of that sharpness, and that is actually really nice looking. So you have much more sharpness. Like if you look at this little dot of whatever that is on the beak of the robin, you can see it's sharper in the 15 versus 5 for sharpening. So it is having an effect there. And then we have denoise, and it's roughly similar with denoising. So it looks pretty good to me. If we compare that to the DxO without sharpening, this would be kind of the comparison. They look really similar to me. The DxO colors are, again, slightly different. You could tweak these in post. It's a little bit more red here, I think, as opposed to magenta and red as opposed to orange. But, I don't think you can go wrong. Where else could we could look a little bit into the shadows here, a little bit of the darkness, and see how it handles the noise. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to be biased here because, I'm open to choosing any software, but to me it feels a little bit like this grain is more uniform in the DxO product, and the Topaz just has like kind of uniform grain with then pockets of like no grain when there's like some subject, and then areas where there's like more intense grain, like right here and here. And it just looks kind of inconsistent in Topaz. But when you look at the whole image, would you tell, would you care? No, because it looks fine. Like it's not like observational at this level. But ultimately, I think, it does kind of, matter. All right, so the last thing I wanted to do was just open up the RAW in CaptureOne so that you can see the difference here in what CaptureOne looks like, because CaptureOne does do a different job. It does a better job at processing these Canon files than Lightroom does. So I do think it's kind of good to look at that as well. So what I'm going to do is choose kind of my favorite ones, which would be these three here. And bring all three of these in. So we've got the original, the Topaz, in this case 5 and 15, and then we have the DxO. And I mean, I don't really understand why the white balance is so different on the Topaz, and why it renders so differently in these products. It doesn't really make sense to me, but it does. It really does. So what I've done is I've just, again, selected kind of the white balance there. You're still going to see differences in the color because it's just something's going on there where the colors are a little bit different. So, here we've got, we could mess with the white balance a little bit more if we wanted to. But you've got here the original, the denoised Topaz, and the denoised Topaz and the denoised DxO. So, when you look at the original, it looks a lot better, I think, than Lightroom. It's a lot less noisy, a lot more uniform. It's a file that you could edit even at 10,000 ISO without denoising. I really think that. And then you can see the colors are off, and I'm not going to go ahead and adjust all those again. But they all do an amply good job. So yeah. So I suppose my final thoughts on all this, and I realize it's not necessarily conclusive because there are a lot of really nice aspects of both software systems. In the case of DxO, you have the ability to use kind of a click-it, one-time click that you just process all your images through. It's pretty faithful to the original white balance of the image. The product you get out is basically a denoised version of the one that you put in, and you can just edit that in Lightroom or CaptureOne or whatever, and it works fine. It's pretty seamless. It's designed to be seamless. It's integrated. The product is itself kind of seamless. I like the consistency of the grain of noise that's left in the image. It feels more like it's mimicking the grain that was in it originally. You don't have odd artifacting, but it is a little over sharpened even when you deselect the global sharpening option. And that would be my only real complaint about the DxO product. Is it would be nice if they just dialed that down a little bit so that we could then add unsharpening masks or other things, high pass filters, things like that, sharpening in Lightroom, just so we could tweak it up as opposed to going down. Because once an image, a raw file like that is sharpened, it's basically impossible to recover the original. You have to work from a baseline of the sharpened raw file. And that could be a deal breaker for a lot of people who don't like over sharpened images, because DxO does tend to sharpen a bit much. Now, when we contrast that with Topaz, Topaz has a lot of options. I think the virtue in the sense of Topaz is you can select their custom settings there. You can also select the different dials. You know, we didn't even get into the post-processing options within Topaz. There are two more kind of levers that you can pull. But the functionality, the customizability of Topaz, that's really what they're gearing towards, as opposed to the click it and set it and forget it option. I do think their set it and forget it option for RAW, which is RAW and then auto, as we see, is very heavy-handed. It's crunchy, it's overly sharpened, and it's overly denoised. The product, I don't think it's competitive with DxO. But then when you adjust some of these toggles, particularly, I think 5 and 15 was best for this image, where you have 5 for denoise, 15 for sharpening, and then under the RAW setting produces a nice image. The color is off and weird, and I'm not sure what's going on there, but whatever is happening, that color is not remotely matching the raw file as visualized by Lightroom or CaptureOne. So that original raw coloring that was exposed as is different, and that means I would need to go through a calibration process to color it, grade it basically every single time, which to me is pretty freaking annoying. So I didn't notice that before I did this test. I think that's something new with maybe new updates that they've produced in the last couple months. It looked a little bit off to me in terms of color. The product is good. I mean, it's really good. You have really good denoising in Topaz, and you have a nice kind of file that you can then edit in Lightroom or CaptureOne. So nothing against Topaz, but personally, like, I would choose DxO. As I've mentioned before, nothing's really shifted in that sense. The other thing I wanted to note is CaptureOne just is better at visualizing these Canon R series camera files, the CR3s. It's just better. So if you're not using anything and you're just going to edit a file directly, I would recommend doing that in CaptureOne over Lightroom, because Lightroom's just very noisy. It renders the noise differently. CaptureOne is just better, and other people have mentioned that. I think that's kind of universal knowledge at this point, but it is just worth mentioning. If you're not going to use a denoise software, it's worth considering CaptureOne. CaptureOne is not as good for masking as Lightroom. Lightroom's masking capabilities are exceptional, and this is not a review about Lightroom versus CaptureOne, but I do think that it's worth noting that anyone who's considering CaptureOne is not like Lightroom in sort of the subject and background and all the different masking options. Lightroom has really gone to next level with that, and I'm sure CaptureOne will catch up, but they're not there yet. But some of the color rendering and noise rendering in CaptureOne and sharpening is actually really, really nice. So yeah, that's my review. I mean, I personally, I think both systems, Topaz and DxO, are great. This to me makes me just feel pretty confident about DxO deselecting the global sharpening option. That's kind of the best approach for these R7 files for me. But you be the judge, see what's best for you, and yeah, they're both really good products, and it's kind of incredible where the technology's gotten at this point.